author Casey Mitchell. If you don't know me already, I think the ones that I recognize know me. I have my author page, but then I recently started this page for the sole purpose of pushing out other indie authors.
We're so thankful for you.
Well, I appreciate y'all. I appreciate people participating because it'd be no fun doing an interview by yourself. But anyway, this is author Kaylon Bruner. And before we jump into the questions, I want to just turn the floor over to you. Tell us a little bit about you, about your writing, about your life, whatever you want to talk about, your books. It's up to you.
Okay. So I came to writing novels fairly recently. 2021 was my first publication. And my background, I have a PhD in reproductive pathology. And so reproductive medicine is my passion. I spent 30 years at Vanderbilt doing reproductive medicine research. Part of that time, endometriosis is the disease we focused on for a long time, which is a disease mostly of reproductive age women. I'm trying to keep my cat out of the screen. There she goes.
Unless she bothers you.
But we studied endometriosis, and I'll try not to get into a long story. We began looking at an environmental compound called dioxin, which is an endocrine disruptor, and it was also present in the compound Agent Orange. So I studied dioxin, Agent Orange for a number of years. And then in 1999, by pure happenstance, I married a Vietnamese immigrant. And so Agent Orange was the compound used in Vietnam. It's an herbicide, and it just destroyed the foliage. And while it was a godsend during the war, it has had very long-term and devastating consequences. And so, like I said, just by happenstance, I married Ken. And years later, we had children. One looks Asian, one looks white, which just fascinated me. And so we did DNA testing. And anyway, because of that, we ended up finding a relative that Ken didn't know about. He was looking for his biological mother. One of Ken's sisters, that's my ex-husband, Ken, one of his aunts had a relationship with an American soldier. And he had taken the baby, raised him, and he was looking for his biological mother. And through us, he was able to connect with her. And it's a fascinating and tragic story. And I encouraged him. I said, you need to write this story. And I think he was overwhelmed. He couldn't do it. And I finally thought, well, because I write, I've always written up all of our findings, and that's been my favorite thing to do as part of the research. And I asked him, I said, do you mind if I write a story inspired by yours? And he loved the idea. He read the first version, gave me blessing to publish it. And I have fallen in love with writing fiction. And because part of his story was set in Vietnam, I had to weave in the Agent Orange story. And then after I published it, I felt like, well, I didn't say enough about Agent Orange because so many people don't know about it. And so many of the Vietnam veterans and their families are suffering because of it. And so I ended up writing a trilogy. And then I just keep writing because I just enjoy it so much. And I've recently retired, so now I can write even more.
Do you have the covers to show us of those books?
I do, of course.
You'd be surprised how many authors come on in. I always mean to add that in the instructions I send ahead of time. Make sure you have your books, and I forget, and then sometimes they forget. So go ahead.
So this is book one of the trilogy. It's called Time Intertwined. And I called it that because it's a dual timeline. We have 1 year that occurs kind of in the present. And then we have another timeline that starts, I think, in 1950 something and goes all the way to the present. And at the end, the two timelines converge. And so that's why it's called Time Intertwined. And again, when I published this book in 2021, I thought it'd be the only one I ever wrote. And then I thought, oh, I need to do more. So I wanted them to be, they have elements that are very similar. They all have the present and the past and things like that, but they're very, very different books. This one is really, you might even call it, I've had a lot of veterans read it and they love it, but this is almost like women's fiction because it focuses on two women and, the mother who lost her child and then the child growing up and like that. And so this one I wrote There she goes again. This one I actually wrote for soldiers. It's Lives Intertwined, and it focuses on these two men. One is Dennis Doherty, who's an American soldier, and the other is Loc Tin Vinh, and he's a Vietnamese soldier, South Vietnamese soldier, and they become best friends during the war, and then that relationship carries throughout their lives and what happens to them. And it's also a whodunit murder mystery because I love murder mysteries. And then the final book, which I retitled Book 1 and Book 2 as part of the trilogy and had no idea what the third book was going to be. And I was halfway through the second book when it dawned on me. This one is an orphan, and it tells how she became an orphan and what happens to her. And my favorite part of the second and the third book, so this is Dennis Doherty. So this is my soldier from book 2. And so there's a little bit of a love story in book 2 and book 3, but in book 2 it's told from his perspective, and in book 3 it's told from her perspective. So anyway, so that's the trilogy. That was my passion project. And
it sounds like it has a lot of tropes in it, a lot of different types of, subjects in it, subject matters. And I love the fact, because a lot of my books are like this, they're fiction, but they deal with a lot of real life issues. Yeah. So it's kind of a convergence of fiction and life. And I know you know the old adage that, real life is always stranger than fiction. And there's so much truth to that. So many more fascinating stories when you start talking to other people about their lives. I think
everybody has a story.
Yeah, we could all write a novel. So I love that. And I know you have other books too. Do you want to go ahead and introduce them, or I've got questions about them too? We can wait till we get into that. What would you like to do?
I wrote, I guess, so this is my first attempt at a psychological thriller because that's what I like to read. And, and I'll tell you the story. I think I emailed it to you. My mother, after I wrote the first 3, because I would call these first 3, PG. If they were movies, they'd be PG. And my mother said, well, you really need to put sex in a novel because sex sells. And I was like,
that's what they say.
Okay. Well, then she read a version of it before it was published. And she's like, I can't believe you wrote this. And she said, you need to use a pseudonym because my friends might read this. I'm like, nope, name's going right on the front.
Smack in the middle.
But anyway, and then Deadly Deceit is another, I don't know what to call it. If it's a psychological thriller, I call it a dysfunctional family murder mystery. You read the first 3 chapters and you think you're in a Hallmark movie, but then Vanessa comes in and you realize, yeah, Hallmark wouldn't touch that. But my sister didn't like it. She said, there's nobody I care about. She said that all these people are terrible. I'm going, I disagree with that. I like the male main character. He makes some bad decisions, but at heart, he's not a bad guy. But he does have an affair with the wrong woman, and it leads to his, it leads down a dark path.
Yeah. That one decision. A lot of great movies are based on that. I mean, Fatal Attraction, Michael Douglas makes you hate him for a while there, but then, that arc comes around where you feel sorry for him, and he's the one that started it. So, yeah, I think that's a great arc. So I love that. And I was reading on your books, obviously, before tonight, preparing for, getting the questions ready and everything. And literally every single one of them sounds really wonderful, but you didn't talk about the one that you warned me about yet. So let's jump into that one too.
So Uncle Tom's Granddaughter. So I read Uncle Tom's Cabin, I think the first time when I was in high school. And I grew up in Mississippi. Everybody here is either black or white. I knew one Asian family, and I met my first Indian when I was in high school. And so everybody here in the 80s when I was growing up, black or white. And I didn't think anything about it. And lots of black friends. I mean, we were just all people, And when I read Uncle Tom's Cabin, I was confused because Uncle Tom he's so denigrated and being an Uncle Tom is a bad thing. Well, when you read him, he was such a devout Christian. And he always did what he thought was right. And he lost his life because he was protecting other people. And that story has always touched me. And I've asked many of my Black friends, have you ever read Uncle Tom's Cabin? And nobody had, but they had this opinion of this man. And so for a long time, I've thought somebody needs to revisit this story and remind people who he was. And I don't know, a year or so ago, I was talking to my sister and my brother-in-law and was telling them, I really want to do something, but I'm not sure I should. Is it my story? Just like that first book, I wanted to tell Cale's story, but it wasn't my story. And I ended up just doing something that was inspired by him. And that's what I ended up doing with Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's not a retelling of that book. It is a little bit of his story, but then what happened, what about his children? He had children, he had 3 children in the original book. What happened to them? What happened when they grew up? They would have experienced the Civil War. They would have lived on beyond. They would have, they could have, descendants here today. And I wanted to tell that story and remind people who Uncle Tom was. And without giving anything away, skin color is only skin deep. It doesn't matter if you're Black or white or Asian or any of it. We're all human, and we can be good and kind, and we should be. And that was who he was, and I just wish we could get back to that. So that's why I wrote it.
I'm in the South too. I live in Georgia mostly. Most of my life I've lived in a few other states, but mostly Georgia. And it's funny because I think it partly depends on what side of the street or whatever you grow up on. But yeah, I love that old saying that it doesn't matter if your skin's black, white, or yellow. We all bleed red, and I love that because we're all human, and the easiest way in the world to incite prejudice is to make the other person, whether it's Black, white, or Asian, whatever, to be less than human, because that's the only way, to me, if you're a normal functioning person, that you can look on someone else and feel that way about it, is because you're just dehumanizing them. And that's really one of my pet peeves because, and again, I grew up in the South. Some of my best friends have been Black, went to high school, we were mixed half and half. And there was we never had racial issues. So I think honestly, sometimes, and I grew up, I was born in 63, so 70s, 80s, and I don't remember it being as big a deal then as it is now. So
that's how I remember it. And I don't know if it's because I was in the South and everybody, none of us had any money. We were all poor, and I don't know, it didn't seem to be that big of a deal. And I don't know when it became and maybe if I were Black, I'd feel differently, but I don't know. It troubles me. I don't want to, I love, Martin Luther King, and he had a dream, and we're not there yet, and damn it, we should be.
Yeah, it's been plenty long enough that we should be. We've overcome other obstacles, and that seems to be the last big obstacle. And my historic romance, it is a romance, but it's based in the Civil War, and I chose that era because this is the only book I literally spent 6 months of research reading the Library of Congress, the Writers Project. You're probably familiar with that, where Roosevelt had the writers to get them to work, to give them something to do to make money, go find and sit down and talk to interview all the slaves that were alive at the time, over 5,000 and something of them. I got so tied up into reading that. the stories were just fascinating, horrific, and some were loving and wonderful, like how they got married and jumping over the broom and all that, and others were just horrific. I would sit there and cry as I'm doing the research for it. But I wanted to make sure that book, even though it's just a historic romance, I wanted it to be very true and honest to the time and the war and the purpose and everything. And so I showed the bad, the good, and the ugly, and not probably as ugly as it was for a lot of people, but it was still a lot of ugly in it, but a lot of good. And then the story's a forbidden story. The girl falls in love with her husband, who's a horrible man, his head slave. So it was a forbidden love. And so I a lot of things happen, and I hate to call it a happily ever after, because all of mine end happily ever after, all of my book, and that one does, but in a twisted kind of way. And I don't want to give spoiler alerts, but it's the only book that has that kind of ending. We'll just leave it at that, because it's not the Kathleen Mitchell or the Casey Mitchell hour. It's the Kaylon Bruner hour. But I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you tackling the subject, because a lot of people don't. And I'll just say this: I might get blasted off of TikTok for it, but when I wrote that book and first came out with it the first time, which has probably been 6-7 years ago, I was part of an author group, and I put a couple of different covers that I was thinking about going with, and no one's read the book, mind you. They literally were only looking at the covers, and they weren't. This is the cover. This is the one I ended up going with. But there was another cover that I had that I was thinking about going with, and it had the man and the woman, and the woman's white and the man's black. And one of the authors on there accused me of whitewashing history. And I'm like, you haven't even read the story. You haven't even read the description of the story. You haven't read a blurb. You haven't read anything. You're literally accusing me of that. All you're looking at is the cover, and it really annoyed me. But anyway, I ended up going with this one anyway, just because I like this cover better. But yeah, I mean, I know we have to be careful on how we say things, because I love what you said earlier. Maybe if I was black, I'd feel differently, because we don't know what they've had to live through, and they don't know what we've had to live through. And it's hard. It's a hard subject to tackle. And I admire the fact that you did tackle that. So,
Well, I think if people read it, I hope they'll be touched, that because we do need to remember what happened. And I had one really good friend of mine. Before the book came out, I was talking to her about it. I'd sent her, I think, like a TikTok trailer, and just asked her what she thought. And she was very concerned. She said, "You're appropriating Black voices." And I said, "Well, I suppose, but I'm also appropriating voices of slave owners, and I never owned slaves. And, you know, in these books, well, in this one, I appropriate the voice of a serial killer, and I'm not that. So how do you write as an author and not put words into people's mouths that you're not?" And she didn't have an answer for that, but it just really bothered her that in the two mysteries that I wrote, I have a Black detective, a female detective. And I wrote her, I mean, she's Black, but I wrote her mainly because she's got this white guy that he's not her boss, but he treats her like he is. And that's the thing women we have to deal with. You've got a colleague who, can you get me coffee, or, whatever. And she's just so frustrated with him. But I felt like I want to have diverse characters.
yes.
And she's a great character. I liked her so much, I put her in the second book. So I don't know, where there's no disrespect.
Yeah, we're getting some great comments below, and I do appreciate the comments below, because again, when we're talking about something that's touchy, we could probably just as easily get hate mail, and we might, who knows. But I agree with what you said. We're writers, if we can only do a one-dimensional character or a one-dimensional world, then we're so stuck into our own little whatever dimension we're stuck in that we can't write anything. And I appreciate writers who take that chance. I actually just interviewed, my mind just went blank, Petey Jansen. I'm going to interview her, but I was talking to her. She wrote a character who the main protagonist is blind. And I said, I want to interview you because I don't know of any other book that represents a handicapped person that's the protagonist, and I mean, blindness is to me, the first handicap.
Yeah.
It's terrible. And so, but she did the book's just gorgeous. I highly recommend it. But she did such a beautiful job. And so we were emailing, and I said, hey, I'm booked through September, but I'd really like to get you squeezed in because I'd like to do an interview for you for that book. Because these minority voices, whether it's racial or sexual or, or gender or handicap, whatever, I think they need to be told. I think they need a voice.
Absolutely.
So, we don't, to me, I love what you said. We don't have to be that person to be able to speak that voice, because it's in our imagination, so it can be whatever we need it to be. I know we spent way
If
too
you
much.
do the research, and you portray it accurately, and I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, and Jackson State University is just down the road from me, and I actually met with one of the history professors because my concern was, some of the books that are, and I'm sure you know this because you did research for your own book, they're written in the vernacular of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not want to do that. I didn't want to do it because, first of all, I think it makes it harder to read. And I also did not want to use the words that they use. And I wanted to talk to him and say, I don't want to be offensive, but I still want people to feel like they're there. It's not the present. And he was very kind and worked with me to make sure that I kind of balanced that, 19th century language with the 21st century audience. And I think as long as we approach these projects, with grace and kindness and wanting to tell these very important stories, but not, we're certainly not whitewashing history, but making it to where people today can really relate and understand.
And if anything, we're raising awareness of it, which, that's the only way you're going to get rid of prejudice is to raise awareness of it. I love something I heard Morgan Freeman say. He said, the best way to get rid of it is to stop talking about it and stop making it an issue. And so if we are, as white women, say, well, you can only write about white women because you're a white woman. That's ridiculous. But
That's ridiculous.
I wanted to address something you said because I had the last semester, I was an English major in college. The last semester, I took a full semester of African American literature. And so literally every single book that we read, which, when you're a literature major, you're reading a novel or two a week, every single one of them was in that vernacular. And some of them were some of them were 100 years ago. The books were written 100 years ago. And they were very hard to understand. It was almost like trying to read Shakespeare for the first time. It's like, okay, wait, I got to wrap my head around this. So when I wrote The Tapestry of Bay Taylor, which was my very first novel about 14 years ago, there is a Black character in there that I love. Everybody that reads that book, they love Annie Mae. And but she talks very Southern. I mean, I grew up in the South. I know exactly how, this isn't because they're Black, but some of them talk that way in very, mostly as uneducated ones, but she talks that way. I love it. And I've had one person who said they couldn't understand it, couldn't read it, and so they didn't finish. That was actually my ex-husband, ex being the key word. But everyone else that's read that absolutely loves that story. And they love how Annie Mae and her husband took in this white woman and just treated her like a daughter, and they became a family. And I love that. I thought it was a beautiful story, and I'm not changing it. I'm not changing it if somebody decided they didn't like it, because this is what we do. And when I wrote this book, the Beneath the Tainted Sky, I struggled with the same problem I think that you're talking about. We're tiptoeing around it. But some of the words that used to be used to talk about other people of different races, I wasn't going to use those because I just think it's one of the most disrespectful, horrible things you can do or say. But I tiptoed around it, and I had her husband, who's the horrible man I was talking about, call them something that's mean, but it's not that. But just to show he was one of those rotten, horrible people. And so, but yeah, I mean, we have to be careful and respectful. To me, it was more about being respectful than it was being careful. So, but yeah, I know we're getting way off subject and we're already having, but I really love this conversation. Apparently, we're doing well because we're having people join us. And if you just join us, I'm author Casey Mitchell. I've written 11 books, about to be 12. I've got a few chapters left in my 12th book. And this is author Kaylon Bruner, who's written 6. Did I count that right? 6 books? 6 books. And we both write in multiple genres, so check them out because she's got some fascinating reads, and that's what we're talking about that got us kind of way off on this subject. I'm going to jump into the questions, though, because I do like doing the deep dive, and some of these are about what we were talking about as well. I'm going to start with the questions that you sent me because I thought you sent great questions. In the book that we were just talking about, Uncle Tom's Granddaughter, what was the inspiration or what made you want to tackle that subject?
Just the environment we find ourselves in. I loved the character Uncle Tom. He was such a devout Christian, and today it seems like, you call someone an Uncle Tom and it means that, you're betraying your own race, the black community. And that's not the case at all. And he felt like he didn't know why, but God made him a slave. And it wasn't he wasn't to question God. God made me a slave, therefore I have to be the best slave that I can be. And so he never stole, he didn't try to escape, he always did what he was told, which is why I think people have a problem with that character. But the decision making was because he was doing what he thought God wanted him to do. And when he was put in a position to betray two other slaves who had escaped, and he knew exactly where they were, he lost his life. And the guy said, "You either tell me where they're at or I'm going to kill you." And he's like, "Well, so be it. I'm ready to meet my Jesus." And how many of us would have done that? You're giving your life. These were not friends. I mean, they were friends, but they weren't his child, they weren't his wife, they weren't his family. These were not people he had known for very long, but he was not going to betray them because he knew Jesus wouldn't. And yet we've gotten to a point in the world where he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. And so that's why I wanted to revisit his character. And again, my story is not his story. It just starts there and it goes off and talks about a lot of different things that happen. Harriet Beecher Stowe is actually a character in my novel, and uh, I hope that it will remind people where we've been and how far we've come. And it starts with a college student. She's a white girl. She's been assigned a project, and she ends up hooking up with another student who's black. And you don't really you see the beginnings of a relationship over the course of the novel. You see the two of them connect. And I did that because we start in 1845 when black and white, that was taboo.
Yeah.
But you end in 2026 where nobody's going to think anything about this mixed race couple. And that was very purposeful to show that distinction of where we've been versus where we are now.
I love that. I love that. And when you were talking about Uncle Tom, it just made me think of the scripture that we should do what we do unto God, not unto man. And it sounds like that's what Uncle Tom's doing. I'll be honest, I haven't read Uncle Tom's Cabin. If I did, it's been so long ago, I don't remember. But it makes me want to go read that and then read your book. So,
You do not have to read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I was very intentional. What you need to know about Uncle Tom's Cabin, you will learn in my book. Uncle Tom's Cabin is not just about Uncle Tom. There's 24 different stories. And most of those stories are not in my book. The ones that were important are. And again, I don't just retell it. I give a different perspective on what happened. And so don't feel like you have to. If you want to, it's great, but it's not a prerequisite at all.
it makes me want to, though.
Okay.
So I think that's a good thing. Anything that makes you want to revisit history, I think is a good thing because, we have a lot to learn from it. In the summary, you promise readers that you will get an accurate glimpse of slavery in America. How did you research that?
Lots and lots of reading. I reread Uncle Tom's Cabin. That was the first thing I did. I read Jubilee. I read 12 Years a Slave, Under the Tulip Tree, which is fiction, but what Under the Tulip Tree, if you've read it, it's one of the stories you were talking about where this young woman gets the job to go and interview a slave. And so a former slave. And so that's what that book is about. And that was a very excellent read, but just a lot of reading, a lot of looking into, the Underground Railroad, because that plays an important part of my book. Just all of that.
Okay. That sounds great. What was the hardest part that you found when you were writing it?
I wanted to tell painful stories in a way. I don't write horror. I
Either.
yeah, I don't want to read it. I don't want to write it. But at the same time, there were some scenes that needed to rip your heart out. And one story that I read that's supposed to be a true story, and it probably happened more than once. This enslaved woman, had been so abused and mistreated that she killed her daughter to prevent her daughter from suffering. And I just cried. My heart ached for this woman to have to make that decision, to feel like that's what she had to do. And a similar thing happens in my book, because how do you make people understand how awful it was without being graphic?
Yeah.
And I didn't have to be graphic to tell that story, but it hurts like hell. Yeah. And if you're a parent, and to know that a woman made that choice because she had been so abused that she thought it was better for her child to die.
And that was kind of the ending scene I was talking about in my book. It was horrific, but it needed to be said. There was really no other way for the book to end. But I literally cried. And matter of fact, I've read the book several times since I wrote it, and every time I read it, I cry. So yeah, I completely understand that.
So when you go back and read something that you've written, especially your early novels, do you just go, "Oh, I could say that better. I could add this detail that it just."
But I tell you, I do that with everything. If I watch a movie, I'm like, "Oh, if they just done that," and I kind of critique everything now. Other people's books, I'm like, "Oh man, if she just added that," But so I don't know if that's my nature, because I'm one of those people anyway that when I walk into a situation, I can see everything that's wrong with it, and there's a word for that.
I do that too. And I was reading your book, The Last Safe House. And the first couple of chapters, I was thinking, oh, I would have said that differently. But by the third or fourth chapter, I was so into the story that I didn't have any more critique, because I was just 100% in. And I thought, well, that's a good sign of well done writing, because it's like when I was in college, I majored in biology and chemistry because I thought I was going to go to med school, and I minored in theater just because it was fun. Not that I was all that great at it, but I thought it was a lot of fun. And there was what was his name? David. I can't think of his last name. He was so good. And every other member of our troupe, oh, Melanie is playing this character, or Terry is playing that character. But when David was on stage, you just saw the character. He was so good that you just forgot it was David. Yeah. And I thought, wow, if I could be that good. And that's how I want, when people are when I write something, I want people to be so invested in the story that you forget. And that's how I felt initially, because you're just getting into it and you're just learning, what's going on. But I think it was about the third chapter, I just completely forgot.
I appreciate that. That's a huge compliment. I will say, for me, pretty much every single book I read, I'm not getting into it until the third or fourth chapter. One of my biggest fears writing The Last Safe House was because she's in that room for 10 days. And my mother, she's my sounding board. She reads like a novel a day. She reads a lot. So she knows pretty much all my stories before I actually write them, because I hash some things out with her. But I said, it's going to be the challenge for me for the beginning of that was, the beginning of a story is already the hardest, because you've got to lay the foundation. You've got to do some world building or setting building or something, or the reader's going to be like, what the heck's going on? And so then that's the hardest part, to kind of, you've got to stick with a book for 3 or 4 chapters before the action starts. So in this book, I did the prologue to kind of hook you in to stay in there long enough. But I thought, how am I going to make people interested in this woman in a room by herself for 10 days? How do you make that interesting? And so you saw how I did it. So again, you keep pulling me back to me.
That's okay.
You need to do your own and interview me so we can talk about that. But anyway, when you were doing your research, was there anything that really surprised you about that you didn't expect, maybe?
Um, I guess I'd forgotten a lot about the Civil War. I know we were taught it. Vicksburg is just down the road, and I've been there many times, but I didn't realize that, I always taught, because I am in the South, we were taught it was states' rights and not just slavery, it was about states' rights, which is true. But what I didn't know was less than 5% of the population, the white population, owned slaves. And the vast majority, and slave owners were exempt from the draft. And so all the kids, and they were young, many of them were very young, they were drafted. And so they were fighting for a cause that they didn't believe in. And it got to the point where they were really scraping the bottom, trying to get soldiers to go and fight. And part of me is glad that we weren't just fighting to keep half the population enslaved. But I didn't know that it was that small of a percentage. And then when I read that slave owners were exempt from the draft, I was just like pissed off. They deserve to have died. And the other thing that I guess shouldn't have surprised me, but it did, is most of the soldiers who died of like gangrene and disease, and not probably because of their injuries, if they were shot or whatever, but most of them actually died from disease. And when you go to the Vietnam War, if you got, this is just the difference between 150 years. If you were an injured soldier and you got to a hospital or some kind of a mobile unit, your chances of survival were like 90%, because we were so good at taking care of people at that point compared to back in 1860 something.
And we have antibiotics and stuff now too, but a lot of soldiers, even in the Civil War, starved to death because they didn't have the resources that we make sure our soldiers have today. So yeah, they
the
tragic time.
The African American, so in 1863, Abraham Lincoln, because the North was having trouble getting soldiers too. And I think it was in 63, Lincoln signed the act that allowed black soldiers to join and have, be able to fight. And they did in droves. They enlisted, but they were not well supplied. And sometimes the white regiments wouldn't back them up. And it's just how well they fought and what they were able to accomplish under even worse circumstances is really remarkable. And those stories need to be told as well.
I agree 100%. Well, let's switch subjects for a minute and go back to the Agent Orange trilogy. We started with that as you were introducing the books, but let's get back to that. You talked about it being the dual time between the Vietnam War and the historic fictional series and all that. Hold on, I've got to get my bearings now because we're switching mid interview, I guess. What made you decide to try your hand at writing fiction? And if you're interested, oh, you were talking about your blog. I'm looking at the questions that you sent. Tell us about your blog. And does that have to do with the Agent Orange trilogy, or is that just...
So the blog are all, I don't know, I've been writing forever. And so one thing that I used to do when I was younger and continued on, something interesting will happen and I'll just write an essay. And I never intended on publishing any of them. But a lot of those have now shown up as my blog. So the essays are all true. And a lot of them do touch on Agent Orange because that's been my research. And Kendrick was 17. He is 23 now. So 5 years ago, I think it was either right before or right after I published the first novel. But Ken Gamble is a Vietnam veteran who lives in Springfield, Tennessee, and he started the Orange Heart Memorial Foundation, and it's very similar to the wall in DC, but it's a smaller wall and it's in Springfield. And what this is, if a veteran survived the war and came home, it's for the soldiers who came home, and you can have your name put on the wall. And he's suffers because of Agent Orange, and he learned about our research, and he wanted to visit the lab. And it just so happens that Ken came to visit the lab the same day it was senior shadow day at my son's high school. And he had zero interest in shadowing me, but he just didn't want to go to school that day. So he came and was hanging out with me in the lab. And Kendrick was 17, and this is important. So I was born in 64. Vietnam veterans have always been older than me. You know, by the time I was old enough to know what they were, they were, 40, 50, whatever. And I never thought anything about it. Well, Ken Gamble, who was probably 75 at the time, I introduced him to Kendrick, and he just says, "Oh, I was 17 when I went to Vietnam." I'm sorry. And I'm looking at my 17-year-old son and envisioning him in a swamp with a gun, killing people and being shot at. And I was horrified.
Yeah.
And, so that is why in this book and where's the third one? This one, I really wanted to emphasize just how young they were. And in this book, in my research for these books, and so my research partner, Kevin, is that age. Now, he was never drafted. He was A1 for a while, but he was never drafted. And he talks about watching the news when they were drawing the names or the birthdays to see who was going to be drafted. And I thought, wow, so just trying to put all of that into the books and have these kids that, this one kid, he wants to be drafted because his father was at D-Day, and he grew up, he knew his dad was a hero and he wanted to be a war hero. And then he does get drafted and he's looking around going, well, this is not what I thought I was signing up for. And just trying to tell all of these different, bits and pieces of the story, because these men, we don't want to forget them and what they sacrificed. And, whatever you thought about the war, most of them were drafted.
Yeah.
And they were doing what their country asked.
And even the ones that did have a choice, like you're talking about this young man, I think a lot of times war and things like war get romanticized, so they don't realize what they're signing up for. I mean, they really have no clue, especially at that age. At 17, I mean, we barely let our 17-year-olds get a job at Burger King now, because we're scared it's going to traumatize them. So, I mean, it's horrific. It's horrific business. I love that you tackle these tough subjects, and they really are, but then use the fiction to make them interesting and make us want to read about it. Because how many people are going to pick up a history book or pick up a book about Agent Orange or Uncle Tom's Cabin or something? We're just not going to do it. But we'll pick up a fiction book about it and walk away a better person because we read it. So I respect the hell out of you for doing that. So
thank you. I really, truly want everything to be realistic, even if Thomasina, who's Uncle Tom's granddaughter, even though she's not a real person, everything that happened to her, the things that she went through, all of it is real. All of it could have happened and probably happened to somebody. And it's the same with the trilogy and even my murder mysteries. Everything that's in there is feasible. And so, but it's so important to me with the historical fiction. And I've got references out the wazoo in the back of the trilogy, because this was my research. And I put a lot of people argue over whether or not Agent Orange can move through the generations. Well, my research shows that it can. And I went out 5 generations in female mice, 3 generations in male mice. And there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to be dealing with this for a long time. And So everything that happened in here, and there's a woman with endometriosis in all of the trilogy, because it's a disease people don't appreciate how painful it is. It doesn't kill you, so how bad can it be? That seems to be the attitude. And it is a horrible disease that really steals life from these women, even if it doesn't kill them, but it takes so much from them. And I just, if one woman reads one of these books and says, you know what, maybe I need to ask my doctor.
Yeah. Now, I know when you were writing the trilogy, you didn't go into it thinking it's going to be a trilogy. Are they standalone books that hold together? So if someone wanted to pick one up, they could read it, or do they really need to read all three?
If they think they're going to read all three, I do recommend reading them in order. But no, you can absolutely read. I've had several people, because the second one is a murder mystery, I've had several people go, oh, I don't want to read a murder mystery. And they don't, but they read the first and the third, and that's fine. And if you read the second book, like I said, it's a whodunit murder mystery, and nobody that I know of has figured out the ending before they read it. But if you read the third book, it does not give away the ending to the second. The second book does give a little bit of the way of the ending of the first, but it doesn't ruin the story, because it's not like, it's either going to be a happy ending or not a happy ending. And okay, it's a happy ending, so that's for the first book, but getting there is the fun part.
Do you have a favorite of those?
Yes, the second one, Lives Intertwined. Maybe because it's the murder mystery, but I love Dennis Doherty. I love him so much. He is this badass Green Beret. He did 4 tours in Vietnam. Wow. And Lynn, this girl that he meets, has him wrapped around her little finger. And she doesn't mean to. She's not a bad person at all, but he falls for her, and just would do anything for her, would die for her. So yeah, Lives is my favorite because of Dennis Doherty.
Yeah. And Charmin McGraw's downstairs. We call that downstairs. She says she loves a murder mystery. We have to be so careful what you say on here, because I just said the word instead of schmurder. We'll probably get jinxed.
I've been saying it all.
Well, I know we've been saying it, and but sometimes they catch it, sometimes they don't. But a quick question. Let's switch to a more fun subject on the spicy books. You said that you made them quite spicy. On the chili peppers, how spicy would you say they are?
Well, I don't know. Well, this one's not spicy at all, but it's Edge of Justice that is, and it's well, it made my mother blush, but she's 83.
Well, my mother's 90 and she never blushes. She loves spice.
I think it depends on your age. If you're our age, 50, 60, it's probably 2 peppers. If you're older, it might be 3.
It's not open door complete description. It's a little bit of
right. I mean, it is part of the story, and to me, that's the important part. It's not sex for the sake of sex. It is part of the story. It helps you understand why the guy, the bad guy, is the bad guy. What is in his head?
See, you touched on something there that I like to talk about, because both of my pure romance, the historic romance and the contemporary romance, are both quite spicy actually, but they're both relevant to the story. And I guess maybe they didn't need to be quite that spicy, but to me, it was relevant to the story, because that's the only way you could understand why these people were willing to do what they did, to overcome what they had to overcome to get where they needed to be. And so, yeah, sometimes it's necessary. And for me, it was necessary. And I don't mind spice if it's necessary to the plot. I think for me, when it turns me off, is when it's just every other page, they're just doing it like rabbits, and, for no particular reason, just because sex sells, as you said. And I don't like that at all. I've DNF'd plenty of books like that. So these two books, The Edge of Justice and Deadly Deceit, are very different from the others. Why did you decide to try a different genre?
I think, the trilogy was a very heavy subject for me, and it took a lot of research. Although the murder mysteries actually,
I know. It's so
yeah,
hard to remember.
they took a different kind of research because I met with a detective and made sure that, because I love forensic science. I'm fascinated by forensic science. I probably should have done that. But so that part I kind of knew. One of my editor who writes horror, she's like, "Oh, you could have her tongue hanging out and her eyes bulging." I'm going, "No, no, that's not what I."
Like graphic gore like that.
Yeah,
No.
I was like, "No, not doing that." But in Deadly Deceit, um, there's some drug and alcohol interactions that play an important role. Spot on medically. The lawyer scene, I had that read by a lawyer, and she's like, "Nope, that would not happen. You can't do that." So I had to rewrite that scene. This is what needs to happen, but I didn't want to, because when I'm watching a movie or reading a book and something happens that is not medically possible,
Yeah.
or oh, it drives me crazy. And I love The Big Bang Theory. I love it. I've seen every episode a dozen times. But when they ate in the lab, no, 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 no. It drives me crazy. You can't do that.
I love that. I'm the same way. And depending on how bad it is, if it's a small thing, I can overlook. But if it's a big thing, I'm just like, it just ruins it for me.
Oh, I was reading a book one time, and I was fairly well into it, but and it was kind of this romance fantasy book, but it had been recommended. Anyway, he picked up her dead body, and then she wrapped her arms around his neck.
Is that a zombie book? That might be possible in a zombie.
And I went back and I went back a couple. I'm like, did he say he thought she was dead,
Right.
or felt like, no, no, he picked up her dead body, and then she wrapped her arms around him. And I'm just going, I'm done. I'm done.
Now, I'll have to say, when I've edited some books, and probably some have slid through, I've realized, because people read a book sometimes in a day or 2 days, maybe 3 days. So yeah, they're going to remember. Oh, wait a minute, they think she just died. How could she wrap her arms around? But when you're writing this over months and months,
Yeah.
and then you're rereading it, it's hard to catch things like that sometimes. And I have noticed even in my own book that and I've had people call me out on, oh, wait a minute, in book 4, this happened. And that's the biggest challenge I've had with writing a series, because you have to have all these notes for every single book. And in the Last Safe House series, they build upon each other. So even in book 5 that I'm writing right now, I'm still have the characters from book 1 in there. And you have to keep. Today I was referring back to book 3. What did they call the bride's garden or whatever, because it's coming back into play. So it's hard to keep all your facts straight. Charmin, who's downstairs, McGraw, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but you need to follow her if you're not. She writes these books. They're amazing. They're like writer's workbooks, basically. She has one for like 5 different genres. She's writing more, but it helps you keep your facts straight, and it has it covers character profiles and chapter summaries. She sent me one just to preview. I was just literally astounded. So, and they're really amazing, and they're very helpful. And it gave me some great ideas. It was honestly, I'm an organized person, but it was very organized. I think it'd be great, especially for a brand new author or for a disorganized person. But I highly recommend them. And Charmin said y'all are friends, so you do know her. But they're wonderful. But Charmin, if I know you're listening, you need to do one to keep up with the series, because I'm about to start a brand new series because I'm finishing up this series. And I decided this time I'm going to get organized before I write the first word. And I want to already have, the series basically organized before I start. And it's quite an undertaking. Every series written and done.
Doing another series. I'm never doing that again. That was,
Never say never.
oh
What's your
God.
favorite genre to write?
I'm sorry.
What's your favorite genre? You're writing in multiple genres. What's your favorite?
I don't know. I think my historical fiction books are better. I don't know why. My mother certainly believes that. My sister, but I like a murder mystery, and I think it's fascinating. Like I said, I love forensic science and the DNA, and so maybe I don't know. So I think I don't know. I write whatever I have another idea for a mystery, but I don't know. And I started it before I started Uncle Tom's Granddaughter, but this book would not leave me alone. And then when I was talking to my sister and brother-in-law, it was last July, I was talking to them and I said, I just really feel like this story needs to be written. And they're like, well, just write it, and if you don't like it, you don't have to publish it. I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's true. And so I don't know. I just write whatever gets in my head and won't sound.
The stories that demand to be written that end up being the best. I mean, all my books are written because I had a dream and I woke up from the dream and I thought, oh, that'd be a great book. But those are the books to me that need to be written and they just stick with me. I've had other dreams that I woke up and thought, oh, that'd be a great book, but it didn't stick with me. And a month later, I'm thinking, I know I dreamed something about that. I don't remember what, because it didn't stick with me. So the fact that that stuck with you and you knew that you had to write that book, that's what makes it a great book. I mean, because the heart's in it,
I hope so. I hope people like it, and I hope they're not afraid of it. I worry that people will be turned off by the subject, but it's. My mother refuses to read it. She's like, I don't want to read about slavery, and she read Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she's like, I don't want to go back, and so that's fair, I suppose.
Yeah, it probably hits a little bit more. I mean, because the older generation had to deal with more of it than ours. And we're looking at it from looking back. It's almost, I know it's not, so please don't send me hate mail, but it's almost like looking back at a fictional world you read about. But for our parents' generation, my mom's 90, when she was a kid, that was still a big issue.
Segregation and all of it, yeah.
So,
and
too close to home, probably.
But I just don't want people to forget where we've been and how far we've come. And then I put little things in it because I'm aware that not everybody knows. You want to make sure your reader knows something without sounding like a teacher. Right. And so in Uncle Tom's Granddaughter, you've got the college student I mentioned earlier, and she's working with her grandmother because they find Thomasina's journal. Well, it's written in cursive, and my children know cursive, but not very well because it's not taught anymore. And the grandmother's like, well, the Constitution is written in cursive. You really need to be able to read that. And just little things like that to show how different things are now than it was. But I like the relationship between the granddaughter and the grandmother. I think that's very sweet. And this is a fun fact. Every single one of my books has a Vietnam veteran in it. Now, obviously, the trilogy does, a lot of veterans, but in this one, Edge of Justice, a veteran cracks the case open. He doesn't mean to, but the detective is talking to him and he says something and she's starting to put pieces together. And so even though he's a very small character just in one chapter, it's his piece of information that leads to kind of, it's not even the resolution, but it makes some pieces fall into place. And then in this book, he's a patient. One of the doctors finds out her husband's having an affair, and that just leads to all these other things. But he's a very important character in that book. And in this book, this is my favorite, the new one, the grandmother is a nurse into the Vietnam War. She's retired, obviously, but that's her story, is that she was in the Vietnam War. And so all of them, because they're so close to my heart, the Vietnam veterans, and I don't want them to be forgotten. I want them to be respected the way they deserve to be. And
that's what I was about to say. It's obvious that that's something that's close to your heart, is why you're weaving it into all the stories. And that's special. And this is your legacy, for your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They're always going to have that to look back and to know a little more about you, you know?
And my ex-husband, our marriage didn't last, but we're still good friends. And I keep his name because I knew I wouldn't get married again. So Tran is Vietnamese. My children have Tran, and I'm so I wouldn't have my family if it weren't for those Vietnam veterans. And, Ken's dad worked for the American Embassy, and they were promised safe passage when Saigon fell. And I think that was a genuine promise, but everything just went to hell in a handbasket. And they didn't have any help getting out. They got out. It was the parents and 5 children, and they made it onto a boat that ended up in Malaysia, I think, and then eventually were able to come here. But the soldiers on the ground were who helped them, not our government. And so I just have so much gratitude for these men who were children.
Yeah. Yeah. You
So
a lot, it sounds like. I know we're running a minute over. Are you okay for us to run a minute over? Because I would like to ask at least a few more questions. I always like to ask because I'll promise ahead of time it'll only last an hour. But every now and then it's just such an interesting story, and we're enjoying it when it's hard to cut you off. I don't want to cut you off because you're a wealth of information. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I think I'm
Ask
more
me
of a
that question, by
pantser.
the way, because it's such
Yeah,
a common question. But I do want to ask you that because I know you're doing research, and these books are much more deep than a typical fictional book. So that's why I wanted to ask.
I always start out with one piece of an idea, and I just start writing, and I oftentimes, like, the first book, I knew the end, I knew the beginning, and I had no idea how it was going to get from point A to point B. And that was kind of the same way with Uncle Tom's Granddaughter. I knew the beginning, and I knew what I wanted to have happen at the end, but I didn't have all the details worked out. And I don't write in order. I'm amazed at people who can write chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, because I write what I'm in the mood to write. In book 1, there's a really
Lost.
huh?
I have to write in order. There's no way in God's green earth I could be all over the place.
I write what I feel like writing, and when I wrote the first book of the trilogy, Time Intertwined, there was a scene where An, who's the main character, escapes from Vietnam at the end of the war, and that's really in the middle of the book, and it was the last chapter I wrote because I avoided it. I read a lot of stories about refugees and how they made it to the States, and they were all so horrible and painful, and I wanted her story to feel real, but I didn't want to write it. I didn't want to experience it myself. And my ex-husband, he never told me his story. He could not talk about it. And I think if I had done all that research before we got married, we might have made it, because I didn't understand him the way I probably do now. Because, I mean, the amount he was 11, and the amount they suffered, and um, I understand. I think I understand him a lot better. But anyway, it just, yeah, I don't, I think I'm more of a pantser because I just write what I feel like writing, and then I see if it fits, and sometimes I have to throw things out.
So tell us about your next book. Are you working on it or just thinking about it? What do you have
I'm
in?
starting to think about it. I'm thinking it's going to be another mystery, and I think I'm going to kind of combine genres, kind of like I did with Lives, where I'm thinking about I want the main character to be she was in the French Resistance, and she ends up in the States because that's what I know. But she ends up in the States, married to an American, and I think that there are a couple of things that are going to happen. And anyway, that's about as much as I'm going to say. So it's going to be the same kind of word we're not supposed to say, mystery, but also historical fiction. So what I'm doing right now is trying to read about the French Resistance and make sure that I know. I think I know some stuff, but I want to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So that's where I'm at.
You must love history because each one of your books deals with history. So, are you a history buff? Is that something you just do you read a lot of history on your leisure time?
I really don't. I just I like stories about people. I like stories about how awful times can bring out the best in people. And where is that? Where do you find that? But during wartime. And I do, I've read all of Ken Follett's stuff, except I stopped reading him when I realized he was making up history. That upset me. And I figured it out because I was reading something and I really knew the history, and I'm going, wait a minute, that's not the order that happened in. And it's like he's taking bits and pieces and fitting them together to suit him. And sometimes we have to do that. In Uncle Tom's Granddaughter, Harriet Beecher Stowe was one of my characters, and she did not live in Cincinnati her whole life. She moved to Florida, and I think she was in the Northeast for a while. Well, that did not work for my story. I needed her to stay in Cincinnati. And so, okay, little bit of poetic license there, but I didn't change the ending of the war. I kept having to go back. When was the Civil War? Okay, 61 to, I made sure that I got all those dates right. And but apparently Ken Follett kind of plays fast and loose with the history, and that really disappointed me because I loved his books. So I don't want to do that.
You sound like me with my historic romance when I got done with it because I had to read. That's the only book that I've ever had to rewrite a lot of the book because when I wrote the first version of it, I realized it didn't coincide exactly with the timing of the war, the timeline of the war. And so, because it was only like the third book I think I'd ever written, or maybe fourth, I didn't have the foresight to know to create a timeline of the war and what I wanted to sew into the book. And so I had left some things out, very important things. And so I had to go back and interject like 7 or 8 chapters. That's why it ended up so thick. But anyway, when I got done with it, I thought I am never writing another history book based on real history. Maybe a history alternative where you can screw around with the facts or something. But it was a lot. It was a lot of undertaking. It was the longest book and it was the hardest book that I've ever written. But it's also one of my two favorites of my books. So I guess it depends. But
Yeah.
I like to ask 2 questions at the end of every interview, but before I end, I want to give you the floor again. Is there anything you wished I'd asked you that I didn't, or that you wanted to interject that we didn't get around to?
Uh,
Hi, Marianne. Thank you.
no, I guess the only thing I'll say is I love hearing from Vietnam veterans, and if a lot of people are really curious about the Agent Orange research, and people are, should be free to, you can find my email address on my website. And if you have questions that don't have anything to do with the books, but because you are affected by Agent Orange or you're a veteran and wanted to contact me, I mean, I want them to be able to do that.
That's very nice. I live in a military town, Columbus, Georgia. Fort Benning is Columbus. So I am familiar with it because, we're a military town. We care about our military. We take care of them. And so that is a topic that has come up occasionally over the years. So I'm a little bit familiar with it. Not as much as, as you are, obviously. But anyway, is there anything else that you want to tell us about your books or your writing or your next project or...
I don't know. I love for people to read them and tell me what they think. And I really hope people will give Uncle Tom's Granddaughter a chance. I think the vast majority of people are really going to like it because it just reminds us where we've been and how far we've come, even though sometimes it feels like we haven't come very far. We really have.
Tell us where we can find your books.
They're all on Amazon. Always have a few books, but I have not. I'm lazy and I have not set up a way to do it on my own. But yeah, mostly just Amazon. They are on Ingram Spark, and so if you ask your library to get them, they will, or they can. And Barnes and Noble can get them, but so far they don't keep them in stock. But they're much more expensive. They're much more expensive through Barnes and Noble, and I hate that.
Yeah. Well, I just found out why, believe it or not, because I've repriced some of my books and lowered them because I'm about to cover some of them. But anyway, I was doing some research on it and I asked Chat, because that's who I used to do my research for me. I said, because I use Draft to Digital instead of Ingram and Spark, but I said, why does Draft to Digital every single time almost force me to price the book higher? Because I really have my books priced as low as these platforms will let me. I put a little padding in there just to make it worth my while. But I was like, why does Draft to Digital force me to price it higher? Sometimes up to $2 more per book. It's not always a few cents. Sometimes it's $1 or $2. And Chat explained to me that Amazon, or the Rainforest, just has the Zon to worry about. But these other companies, because they do the libraries, they do other formats, when they give their books to these libraries, they still want their 35% or whatever percentage it is. So they have to price it enough that they can give these companies the discount that they expect and still get their cut. So we authors are the only ones that are not getting our cut because we can't price it high enough for, people are not going to buy a no-name indie author's book. They're going to pay $25 for a paperback from us, so that everybody can get their cut. So we're usually the ones that get cut out. So, but that's why I just literally learned that yesterday when I was doing some research on pricing. Are you in KU?
I am.
Okay. So KU's a great place to get it. And just for people that don't know, even if you download a book free, I said the F word, in KU, authors still, because they get paid by the page count. So I've heard some readers that don't understand how this works. They're like, well, I don't want to download it on KU because then the authors don't get paid. They do get paid. It's the way that the Zon.
It's very similar to the paperback. If they read the whole book, you actually make about the same as you do at least for mine, because of the way I've priced my paperbacks as low as I can. And so I usually make about the same either way. I don't care. I want people to just read it. And please leave a review.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is my pet peeve. I'm trying so hard to get reviews. And I read this recently too. About 1% of readers leave reviews. And I'm like, no wonder I don't have enough reviews, because if you can get 1,000 people to read your review, then you're lucky enough to get 100 reviews. Honestly, with mine in particular, now Charmin downstairs, she's had great results with reviews, and reach out to her. She'll give you some clues, because I just reached out to her about a month ago and she helped me, and mine are already going up a little bit. So reach out to her and ask her what she does, because it's actually really easy. It's one of the easiest things I've ever done, and it works. So she's phenomenal with that. That's why I love this book talk, because we learn from each other. That's why I keep a notepad here, because I always learn from every author that I interview. It's one of the things I love about it. Okay, if we've wound up, I have 2 questions that I like to ask. The same 2 questions at the end of every interview that I do. Thank you so much, by the way. Thank you for joining us. If you're just joining us, thank you so much. We appreciate you. When Marianne said, are you then what you up to? I don't understand that, Marianne. Rephrase. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate this so much. Just so that you know, I'll be emailing you. I've just learned how to record these, and so I upload them onto my YouTube channel, so it will be out there for more people to see, hopefully. I have a total of 7 followers on YouTube, but hopefully that's going to start.
Hey, you got to start somewhere.
I started it like 6 months ago, but I wasn't putting anything over there. And then I recently, about a month ago, figured out how to record these. Actually, one of the authors I interviewed told me how to record it. And so I always upload them there, but I'll be emailing you that link so that you can, because you can have little cuts, you can edit it and pull out, things and use it for content. So I'll be sending that to you. Anyway, here's the last 2 questions. Thank you for tonight. Thank y'all for joining us. What is something small that brings you disproportionate joy? And it can't be your children. It cannot be your children. That's always the cheat answer.
No, I don't know. I think I'm very grateful for all of them. I grew up, we had no money. I had no idea where I was going to go with my life. And I've had so many opportunities. I've worked hard, but every point, some authors talk about their family's not supportive of them. My sister is my biggest cheerleader and always has been. And I think I'm just so grateful that I have been able to have a life that means something to me. You know, I've worked hard, but not, but I have a lot to show for it. And I'm just really, really grateful for the opportunities I've been given. And I try really hard to always pay it forward.
I love that.
You know, Book Talk has been great. And I try to help other authors when I can. What you're doing is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't know me, and yet, you know, I've gained 50 followers since you picked me up. And it took me 4.5 years to hit 1,000 followers. And I've gotten 50 in what, 2 weeks since you've been talking to me. So it's just those, I just feel like I've been so lucky to find people who are supportive of whatever it was I wanted to do. And I like being able to kind of give back in the same way.
That's wonderful. And I appreciate you telling me that because you're the first person that's told me that. So I never really know where it's going. Couple of questions to answer. Charmin says she loves your naughty wood walls. So there's that compliment. And then Marianne said, is grandchildren cheating for your favorite thing that you have joy? Yes, Marianne, obviously grandchildren is cheating too because they bring us more joy than our kids most of the time.
I'm still waiting for grandchildren, but I'm not in a hurry. My kids are 22 and 24, and neither of them are married yet, which is fine. But my youngest one has a girlfriend who I absolutely love. And I'm like, but am I ready for him to get married? Probably not. But anyway.
My daughter's 39, so she's given me 2 kids, and they're wonderful. My boys are young too, so I'm like, I tell them all the time, neither one are married. I'm like, take your time, enjoy your life, travel, do whatever you want to do, you know, because once you have those kids, I mean, you can travel with kids, but it's different. You know, if you travel without them, your heart's left at home. If you travel with them, then you got to change diapers while you're on vacation. So it's completely different. But let's see, I will definitely read. A lot of people are saying they're going to push you out and they're definitely going to read your books. Thank you so much. If you're not already following Kaylon, please follow her. Please push her out. Let's build her up to 10,000 followers. So we'll get her up there. Last question, and then we'll end the interview. What is your favorite word?
I don't know that I have a favorite word. I have words I don't like. Overarching annoys me. But I don't know that I have a favorite word. I like interesting words. Yeah, I don't think I have a favorite word. I've never even been asked that question.
Yeah, well, I haven't either.
What is your favorite word?
Joy. And I had to think about it, though. It didn't come to me when I first came up with the question. It didn't just like, oh, joy. But I put a lot of thought into it. But that's why I like springing it on my authors, because we write with words, you know. And so we all have a list of words that we love. And it's hard to pick a favorite. It really is hard to pick a favorite. But
I certainly have crutch words and phrases. I've realized in one of my books, I say in a moment way too much. And so I've learned to search for it in a moment. There's got to be, you know, so I have crutch words, but I don't know. Onomatopoeia is an interesting word. I like interesting words.
Did you notice? I think it's in Safe House. This shows my memory. I have horrible memory problems. I think it's in Safe House. If it's not Safe House, it's in the second one, in The Last Lie. But one of the men, the male characters, loves odd words too. And so I happened to come across some odd, funny words that you don't hear. Matter of fact, Spell Check picked them up every time, but they're real words. But yeah, he likes to do that. And he becomes kind of known for that, throwing these weird words out there. And people are like, oh my gosh, you know, rolling their eyes.
Must be book 2. I don't remember that. I just finished book 1 and I don't remember that.
Might be book 2 in The Last Lie. He likes that, but I like weird words too. I like different words that most people don't. My email list is called my quill coterie. I had never heard of the word coterie before. I was trying to think of something. I love quill. It's kind of my thing. My parents gave me 20 years ago a a shadow box quill because they knew I was into writing. So I've always loved the word quill. And so I wanted something because I love alliteration to go with that. And I think it was chat that said, well, what about catering? And I'm like, what does that mean? It was like a small group of people who have the same common interest. I'm like, that's perfect. So I named my email list My Quill Catering. So yeah, I like odd, strange, crazy words that we don't hear every day.
Well, I do freelance medical writing now that I've retired from bench research, and my business name is Business of One, but it's Biomedical Prose because I feel like writing science in a way that's entertaining, if that makes sense. You always want to tell a story, and not everybody does that. But I think that make my medical writing stand out is because it's easier to, because people think, oh, you're a scientist, you must be so smart. But the thing is, we know our own work very well. But you want other people to read it, and so you never know if the paper they're reading is the first time they've ever read about endometriosis or Agent Orange or whatever it is. So you've got to write it where you have to assume a background of physiology, but you want to pull them in. And so anyway, so that's what I called my freelance business, Biomedical Prose, because it's not just a textbook, even though it is kind of.
I was going to mention, because you were saying a minute ago that you use In a Moment frequently. I don't know what software program you use for editing. I use AutoCrit. But when I first got AutoCrit, excuse me, and I uploaded my first book into it, this was about 3 years ago. I wanted to put all of the books I'd written up to that date through AutoCrit, it was a 6-month horrific experience because AutoCrit is so good at what it does, and it will make your book so much better than it was, but you will want to throw it out the window because it finds everything. Anyway, it tells you every time you've repeated words too much. I had used, I don't remember now if it was just or something, it was some word I had used like 3,000 times.
Wow.
It highlights them, so you can go through and change it to another word that, so you're not repeating the same word. And I'm just like, it makes you a better writer because I swear to this day, every time I write these words that I've had to go back and erase 3,000 times in one manuscript, every time you type it now, you're like, oh, wait, I don't want to use that because I don't want to spend, a whole day trying to erase this word. But I highly recommend AutoCrit, and it picks up those kind of things too. But it's amazing, and I use Attica.
Charmy is saying she uses yeah, that's one of my crutches too. And sometimes you just need to say it.
Yeah, there's no other way to do it. It reminds me of a college professor I had, the one that encouraged me to write. He was not from the South. He was from where was he from? I can't remember. New York. And anyway, I'm from the South, so I use, I'm fixing to go to the store. And he was like, we were talking in private. We became very good friends. And I said, well, sometimes you have to say fixing. He said, no, you don't. I said, yes, you do. He said, if you're going to the store, just say you're going to the store. I said, but if I say I'm going to the store, somebody might say, oh, well, when are you going to the store? I said, but if I say
I'm fixing to go
to the store, they know I'm fixing to go. He stopped. It really stumped him. And he was like, I actually really see that point that makes sense to me. That was one of the proudest moments of my life that I taught this PhD something. So, anyway, I have so thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who joined us. And yeah, I'll be following some people.
People are saying that they use just too much. There's 3 or 4 people that are saying that. So I guess we're just going to have to get over it, aren't we?
Yes, you're just right. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone that joined us tonight. I had a really good time. And when you come out with another book, please reach out so we can do another interview and talk about that and get you 50 more followers.
Thank you.
I need to hang out first because you get a few cents for tuning in tonight or a few coins or something. I don't even know what you get, but I know everyone says that they want it. So I'm going to hang up first so that you don't lose that. And I will email you the thing for this by tomorrow sometime. All right?
No
Thank you.
rush. I know you got 12,000 other things you're doing, but just whenever you do it.
I'm doing nothing else because it is 8:30 at night where I'm at. So, where are you located? I didn't think to ask you that.
I'm in Madison, Mississippi. So it's real close to Jackson, which is the capital.
You said you grew up in Mississippi. I didn't realize you were still there. So you're still there.
Well, I grew up in Grenada, went to Nashville for 30 years, and then came back largely to help my sister. My kids were grown, and my mom lives next door. This is their house. They're in Alaska on vacation, and I'm here taking care of the farm.
That's nice. I would not want to go to Alaska on vacation. I have heard it's beautiful, but I detest the cold. I couldn't do it.
It is their 40th anniversary on Sunday, and so this is a bucket list trip that they've been planning. As soon as they knew I was moving back and could take care of Mom, they booked the trip.
That's good. That's good that you have her and y'all to help each other out.
Yeah, no, it's great.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much, Kaylon. I'm looking forward to reading your books and having you back on again. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.